sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for. When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth. In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. This is one of your hosts, Michael Nash, and I am actually not with my co-host. My partner, my son, Ethan Nash, is not with me today. I don't remember if we've actually explicitly explained our roles. I'm the founder, the president of Nash Consulting. Ethan, many years ago, was brought on, and he is now the director of operations. And that basically means he sometimes just does all the work. And I get to do the fun stuff. And today, I think, is a good example of that. I get to do the fun stuff today, and he is holding down the fort. And by fun stuff today, I'm excited about this. We have an interview. I have with me here today, Mark Morrey, and I'm really excited about this conversation. Mark Morrey is a leadership mentor and a consultant from Vermont. As we do, Mark works with executives and lots of other leaders, but he has a couple of really special and unique focuses. For one, he's passionate about reconnecting humanity to the natural world, which I hope we can talk about sometime, even if it's just him and me. I used to run a program taking teenagers out into the wilderness and climbing mountains and doing all sorts of cool things with them. So I love the idea of combining transformational leadership consulting work with the outdoors. But that's for another day, because another of his unique areas of focus, and the one we're going to focus on today, is building community at work. Mark calls himself a human connection specialist, which I love. And he works to shift workplaces from places of isolation to communities of human connection. We've talked on this podcast many times and include in our work with organizations a focus on healthy teams, strong and interdependent relationships at work, the primacy of trust and respect in the workplace, in workplace relationships. We talk about true authenticity. We talk about psychological safety and so much more. And so I resonate really strongly with Mark's message. And I'm excited about the conversation we're having today about creating community at work. And by work, I mean both on-site, but also in the challenging context of remote and distributed workplaces. So when I asked him what he likes to do with his free time, he said, and I quote, "Growing my own wild garlic from Ireland, collecting acorns to make flour, and making maple syrup from trees outside my door." Dude, I've got a question for you. Do you weave your own clothing as well?
I'll have you know, I'm currently growing flax fibers in my garden because I like to connect with my ancestries as part of connection around who I am. And so I found out in Ireland, they had an incredible industry around flax and linen, Irish linen, right? And all sorts of lace they used to make. It was world renowned. And they just started regrowing flax and bringing their tradition back. So I thought I would join them. So I'm growing a patch of flax in my garden, and I'm going to process it straight to fiber with a spinning wheel and then start making fabric from it.
I was literally joking. Like, you're going to make your own clothing and you're doing that. Okay.
Pretty much.
This is great. Awesome. Well, that's great. Hey, Mark, thank you very much for being here. We are actually, I said you're here with me. We are literally on opposite coasts right now. So I'm assuming you are in Vermont in your home. Awesome.
I am. I'm in my kitchen with my pseudo backdrop here that looks like an office.
Awesome. And I am in a little sound booth in Leavenworth, Washington, near my home, right up in the Cascades. We actually are at 93 degrees right now at 11 o'clock in the morning. How's the weather there?
We are doing fine today, a typical rainy, cool day, but we did have some high 90-degree days recently as well. And we're seeing mild drought going on in Vermont, which is rare in the summer, but I know it's even worse out west. So I'm crossing my fingers we make it through this year without massive wildfires.
Us too. Yeah. We have a problem with that most summers. So, hey, let's get into this. I've been, as I said, I'm excited about this conversation. Building community at work is near and dear to my heart and our heart as a consulting team. So what I'm really mostly interested in is, obviously a little bit about your philosophy around community at work, why it's important, why it matters, what are the end results. I'm mostly concerned or interested, of course, in how do we get there, right? So go with it a little bit here. Let's talk first about the importance of community at work. Why do you find this to be, why do you spend so much energy and focus on building community at work?
I think the role in that gives it context is that I've spent a majority of my life working on building community in community. So I'm a naturalist at heart, I think. I really study nature. I see the importance of humans' relationship to nature as like kind of the fundamental goal of how we raise children and how we build communities. Because ultimately, it's the air we breathe and the water we drink. So how do we build an ecological relationship to the place we live in so that it continues to feed and serve our future generations? Now, what I noticed is that in working on that the last 20 years, that communities have become more and more fragmented, more maybe under stress of dual income families or moving away from the places they grew up, losing touch with traditions on the land, losing touch with sense of place. And in that loss, a loss of belonging, which I suppose initially was a trauma or a sadness, but the next generation maybe knew they didn't have it. And then the next one, they didn't know they didn't have it. And for me, as a systems thinker and a developmental long-term specialist, I think about the impact of not knowing that we don't belong is kind of dangerous, because what is it that's guiding our behavior, our ethics? What guides our direction besides self-interest? And then we have other things in the mix that I think are part of the tension, which might be either economic challenge or high consumer values, which is a little more short-term and a little more trying to get your esteem and accomplishment and satisfaction from more material gains. All that combined, I think we have an equation that leads to environmental destruction or climate change or loss of biodiversity or just a lack of care initially around how we tend the world that we're in. So one of the source points is either families or communities themselves. So I started working on all three of these things at the same time. How could we have a developmental childhood? So if you've raised kids, which you have, right? You're probably thinking about, what are my values? What are guiding my higher purpose of being a parent besides, let's say, financial security in the long run? What else do I want to provide as a parent? Healthy social relationships so that they are contributing to the citizenship of our community, or a sense that what's good for others is good for us, some kind of way of holding the whole. So parents have a really strong role in that, and they can either be mentoring towards that or mentoring away from it. And I've just seen trends like grandparents used to live in our homes, for example. And we used to have multiple extended family relationships as part of raising our children. For example, the role of the aunt and the uncle in how children develop their values. Parents can only be so much to their kids, especially around adolescence. That stage where you start to get the hand, and they're seeking other people to guide them. Well, who is that group of people that share the same values of you? And if it's not cultivated, then we're in kind of a wild west of extended people that may or may not care about what you care about. So community is a really important fire, in a sense, that has to continually be tended, or else it goes out. So I started studying, all right, let's create a system for community development where there are lots of different roles in the community where you can put a healthy piece of dry wood on that fire and start to build up a flame that we can mutually draw heat and light and nourishment and belonging from. And from that, build a sense of care, not just for ourselves, but for others. And it leads to things like democracy or tending of the natural world beyond our self-interest. And then we have a good world. So that's what I've been working on. And it led to creating organizations around this called nature connection communities, but it really focused on conscious parenting and this multi-role social development. So that's the context, is realizing that communities are fragmented, but also communities are a solution for broader social connection and belonging.
Right. Beautiful.
In the workplace, I've realized that this is where a lot of people are spending their time. If you're spending 60 hours a week at work and you're not experiencing community, and then the rest of your time at home, you're not experiencing community either, then I think we're really missing something in terms of life satisfaction. So
that's a really good point. We spend over 2/3 of our waking hours, in the workplace.
Right.
And if we are not experiencing community there, that's going to impact us physically, spiritually, emotionally, and every other way.
Where else are we going to get this? So I know it's crazy. I would prefer to have community and community, but what if, this has been my driving question, what if the workplace could be the instrument for community development? What if we built such a connective, thriving environment of social development as work got done, that it moved back into families and back into communities in real time as a source point?
Wow, that's unique and actually kind of a beautiful way of looking at it. Is that possible?
Well, I think it is. I work with a lot of organizations, so they're not Nike and Google implementing all these yet, but organizations that apply community principles to their workflow, and I think it works great. So, for example, this is a small thing, but I think you can start to get the feel for it. In organizations and teams that I create, we create rituals of connection before work gets done. And so these are moments where we value the whole person, not just the transactional role that they're playing, their title or whatever. And it slows things down, and it takes a little bit of time, and it may not be time efficient, but it's effective because, this whole thing about the speed of trust, that moves a lot faster. So it's a little left before right. So one of our meeting rituals is have a practice of gratitude together.
Nice.
So what is that about? And sometimes we say it's bringing your heart and your mind to the table so that we have more resources to solve the problems that we're working on. Gratitude itself is a worldwide practice you can find in communities and cultures. So it's already a human discipline. What is it exactly? Well, if we haven't practiced it in our families and we've lost touch with it, we have to relearn the technology. And one of its purposes is voluntary humility. It's different than sometimes people confuse it with being thankful for somebody, like an honoring or an acknowledgement. I consider it different than that. Gratitude is really where together we're going to have this moment where I'm going to find the thing that I am interdependent with or dependent on and vulnerable to that has made me who I am. Small thing, kind of like counting your blessings.
Let's practice that. Let's say we're having a meeting.
Perfect.
Conversation. Ask me the question.
Great. So before we get started here, Mike, on our podcast, just take a breath and think about, what is it part of your day today or this week that you just couldn't live without? That is, you just realize, oh man, I'd be nothing without. Something you're grateful for.
Wow. The couldn't live without is a little bit hard for me, but I'm going to notch it one level down and say my life would be way less rich, right?
Sure,
How's that? Does that work?
Yeah, that's right in the ballpark.
Yeah. I would say this morning, my wife had a really busy day and I knew she was trying to get out the door. And I said, hey, do you got 5 minutes to sit on the porch with me and have coffee? And I could tell she was torn. And she said yes, and we just had a lovely time. And I had this realization of how lucky I am to be able to start my day with a relationship.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Okay. How about you, Mark? What's something that you adds richness to your life, to your day, to your week?
I'm tracking the health of my daughter during all of this pandemic, and so she's doing remote college work right now, living at home, and she's 21 now, and it's an era I probably would have had less connection to, being away at school or just moving out into the world. And I'm having this view into her blossoming into being a young adult and leading the world around what she cares about, which has to do with bridging differences. It's a real strength of hers and a real passion. And she's confidently leading people older than her to consider the power of other people and the power of people who are different than you.
Wow.
And oh my gosh, so I'm just proud of that. And also just that she's healthy and that she's not buried by other challenges. So I'm just grateful for her health and well-being and thriving right now.
That's really cool, Mark. Hey, can we take a little more time on those kinds of starting the day or starting a meeting? Do you have other thoughts or ideas?
Well, I think the other one is sometimes people have just real stuff that happens that has nothing to do with work. And is it appropriate or not to share it? Are people going to use it against you or not? Can I be my real self in this team? And I think that there might be some healthy boundaries around your team versus your org or whatever. But at some point, creating conditions of trust where we can open up more of ourselves for a few minutes because we're struggling. And there's bounds to it. And if you can set the tone of that and also allow it to be put back away and move on and not pathologize somebody, that I honestly think adds to a whole lot more productivity for people, like as an outcome, maybe not as your goal, but if I'm sitting on something that happened on the way to work and I'm trying to like shift my energy and there's no acknowledgement of it, I'm just like a fraction of who I am. And I'm putting on a face, a game face. But what if we could pause and do a check-in, right? And so sometimes you can do this thing called the thermometer, like a temperature check, but you're using your thumb. Mm-hmm. So if you do thumbs up, your thermometer is good, or you could do kind of halfway or thumbs down. And on a Zoom call, if you have like 8 people on your team there, you can just quickly see how are people doing. And what's great about it is some people verbally don't want to share their feelings. They don't know how to get into it, but it's just like instant permission to just put it out there. And then you see like, there's some thumbs. And after like 10 times of doing this, people will just be honest because they know nothing bad's going to happen. So you're like, oh, I see, Micah, that your thumb was a little below half there. You want to say anything about that? Yeah, it's just a crappy morning. I didn't sleep well. And that's like, cool. Do I need to fix them? Do I need to address it? Is there anything you need from us? No, I just wanted to say that's fine. I'm just like, whew, great. Kind of like put that aside,
I really like the balance you described there of opening space for that, acknowledging the whole person, giving people a chance to show up and be authentic. And then, like you said, not pathologize it, not over focus on it, be able to kind of now put it aside, keep it close. You're not denying it, but you're now able to say that now let's move forward. Let's work on the stuff we need to work on. We do a little bit of that. What is it right now that could keep you from being fully present here today? What is it about your day, your morning, your life? Let's share what that might be, and then set that aside. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of those. I think that's really, really cool. And I think creating a culture.
Anybody sitting on anything?
Right. Yeah. Anything distracting you. I love those questions, and I like building a culture where over time people become more comfortable with that kind of authenticity.
I actually instituted gratitude at a 100-person workplace that previously had no relationship to it. And it took about a year. And if you just think of it that way, like, because people will spend 10 years not doing that. So it doesn't take forever, but you just need to nudge in that direction. And there needs to be, I said ritual in the sense that it's rhythmic and there are known beginnings and ends to the process. It creates safety, basically, because you're inviting vulnerability, but it's not forever. It's just this moment where I see you more as a whole person, right? Nice. And I think the philosophy under it for me is really important. And it has to do with what makes your team so strong is its difference. Everybody has a unique quality to bring to the team. And if we're kind of treating people flat, then there's a unconscious expectation that everybody performs the same. And we're leaving all this creativity on the table. And so when do we get to show the different parts of ourselves so that I say, oh, when I'm doing work with you, Mike, I have a sense that you're creative in this way. You tend to look at the world from different points of view than I do. I have an understanding about what you're prioritizing, what you value versus I'm just guessing.
I love it. That the organization that you said it took about a year for that to kind of take root and grow. Can you say a little bit about what it looks like now? Like, how does that gratitude show up in their world?
Yeah, in two ways. One is they're a software company, so they do a stand-up. They have a 20-minute stand-up, and they go through 80 people in a short amount of time, and they have their blockers, they have their next thing that they're working on, and one thing they're grateful for, which is so cool because it went from like transaction, like super efficient to like, my daughter's graduating today, and the group goes, "Way!"
Very cool.
And that's every day. Then there's your meetings, right? Where you can have a longer process sometimes with people on Monday morning or Friday. I encourage people to do that because it changes the bandwidth up a little bit. I was working with the COO, and there's two other executives on the team with her, and there was a tension going on. There was a problem, and they quickly got together, and they were like putting a fire out kind of energy. And she said, "Can we just pause for a second?" They're like, "What?" She says, what's something that you're grateful for right now?" And he was like, "Are you kidding me?" And she said, "No, I'm not." And she fiercely stood for it. And what happened was it transformed the conversation in 5 minutes.
That's really great. I love that story.
Right? Because don't you get into the lower brain states when you're panicking? Like, the lower brain stem. She's like, "You have to bring more of yourself on board just to answer my question." And she's strategic like that, but she also was an operator, right? She's the COO. So she wants to see us practicing at all levels.
It strikes me that you're going in from sort of the sympathetic nervous system where you're stressed out and you're in sort of some version of fight or flight or whatever you're in, right? And then suddenly you're thinking about what you're thankful for, which can, trigger your parasympathetic nervous system. And it can, I don't know, produce some oxytocin or whatever else happens there. I think that's awesome.
Absolutely. And or just take a breath. I've been part of men's groups for a long time, and we just get into the body for a minute. Just take 3 breaths. We can continue the conversation. But all of a sudden, there's a different message going on that we're not in desperation, right? We can actually change something very small thing, and now we can change maybe big things.
I love it. Something you're talking too about, kind of closely related to gratitude, is, there's a vulnerability, an openness that you're talking about here. And let's talk maybe a few minutes about cultivating that ability of people to bring their whole self. I've worked with executive teams where I've asked the question, share a challenge that you have either successfully overcome in your life or that you are still working on. The many times I've done this, it's been really interesting. I would say 80% of the time, these folks get to a level they've never gotten to before. They go back in their life and they think of something that's been really hard for them. We've had people talk about learning disabilities that they've overcome. We've had people talk about relationship crises. We've had people talk about death in their family. It's been really interesting. And I'll say it's been a challenge to kind of keep it, contained and, not let it become the theme of the day. But, if you take an hour when you've got a full day together, I think there's trust that just is built right there automatically through vulnerability. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that? Trust growing and building through the practice of vulnerability.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that occurs to me is, what's the message, right? Culture is full of agreed on constructs that are slightly below our awareness, right? So if you were a new hire and you just rolled into a meeting that started with gratitude, you partially be just like, "Oh, this is the way things happen here." You wouldn't know that it was invented 2 years ago, or the way people dress, or the fact that they can hang out having coffee and no one's supervising their break time, or just these little subtle things. So what's the message if the executive can share a vulnerability without being taken down? There's no cutthroat. No one takes them out from behind.
Wow.
It's a silent message that's like, well, what permission does that give me? Right. And I think this is really all kind of in the same vein, which has to do with what's required for belonging. What gets in the way of belonging? And being a human being is we're failed creatures all the time. Right? We're challenged people. And there's some strange antithesis to that called perfectionism. It's kind of like people are holding out their hands going, is it okay to actually be my whole self right now? Like, am I going to get fired for this? And when the shoe doesn't drop, they're like, holy cow, is this for real? This is amazing. I know a lot of people who would love to work here.
Because would you say that people have a longing for showing up, or for bringing their whole self to their situation?
Yeah, we're social animals. There is this thing called mirror neuron resonance.
Yes.
You know about this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, say more. I love this.
Well, it's been a while since I've dug into it, but it's one of these unconscious things that are going on but from body to body. And so I think it's important to talk about with culture. If there's a free aspect where I can have an emotional range of joy or sadness or vulnerability, that will carry over to somebody else in a non-intellectual manner. Like children figure this stuff out with their families. You don't intellectually tell your kids how we run the family. They just figure it out, right? And it's called mirror neuron resonance, where there's communication happening. And it's about a primal social level of trust. All of this being said, it's like if we're free to be ourselves, we can bring that uniqueness to the problems and bring it to the table.
That mirror neuron resonance, empathy is part of this. This is that, that idea that we can actually impact the vibe of the culture we're in, and we can impact each other by what we're bringing to the table emotionally.
Right.
So you and I show up more thankful.
Right.
That's likely to spread to the people around me.
Right. In fact, like we could have just done gratitude at a meeting, at a stand-up, and then we're in some other discourse, and that's still carrying forward. That'd be a good way of describing mirror neurons, where the other person is experiencing the effect of my gratitude 5 minutes ago, like a pebble in the pond, right?
Right.
Yeah. So there's another powerful thing that I think ties into this. Same idea, mirror neurons, empathy, shifting the creativity of a culture. And it has to do with the biology of co-evolving with nature. Now, this is a deep premise of mine that goes way back, that as human beings, we have survived in the natural world. Our senses are built off of the natural world. We're basically an animal, right? We're a species. And you can see other animals' biology is interacted with the natural world. That's why they have specialties, eyes in front, born to hunt, eyes on the side, born to hide, and all sorts of other really cool strategies. And we've got our own. Well, what's the effect culturally and socially if we disconnect ourselves from that root over 100 years and we never tap back into it and we keep moving forward? Can we just disregard it and leave it behind, or is there an impact? And the obvious answer for me is, well, there's an impact. There's a deep impact. We start losing touch with our humanity. We start losing touch with the source material of what makes us human. And it's an odd bias to consider anything other than that. But I think we've gotten to places where nature is optional somehow, and it has short-term and long-term consequences. So in terms of work, we also have technology in office buildings. So not only do we have this community thing, but we have an eco-sociological kind of community as well that we could lose touch with. What would it be like if nature connection, nature processes were part of workflow as well? What would we get back on the table? How would that affect our workday and the uniqueness of our company? So when I've been working with executives doing offsites, having a solitary time in nature is a primary instrument of what we work on. Of course, we do team building, we do problem solving, we ask questions like you're talking about to build trust and vulnerability with each other. We even work with frameworks around systems thinking for strategy. But like the gratitude moment, there is a shift that takes place if we take a minute and allow our senses to engage in what's actually happening in the natural world around us. So they've already done a lot of science on this, so I'm not making it up. But people who live around green areas, or people who have a high population of birds in their neighborhoods, are proportionally many times happier and more well-adjusted humans than people who don't, period. Kids who are allowed to go outside for X amount of hours during the day get better grades than kids who don't. I mean, just real basic stuff. People who have chronic illnesses or people who have emotional disorders are highly more self-regulated when they have time spent outside than when they don't. It just goes on and on. So the question is, well, if that's so many benefits to it, why are we not doing it?
So what does doing it look like in the workplace?
Right. It's kind of a community cultural practice that needs to be adopted. I think at some point it'll become normalized. And so with the pandemic, with everybody being remote, I saw an opportunity to say, oh, let's create a nature connection routine as part of the workday because everyone can just walk out their door now. I have 6 routines that I created as part of an isolation to connection offering. So we talked about gratitude, but another one is called the sit spot. And it's like 5 minutes from your door, less, 100 feet from your door. And it's a place you sit every day, every other day, about 20 minutes. And the neuroscience behind it is you start to actually build a rhythm with the natural world that helps you regulate your emotions and your stress. Your cortisol levels go down. And there's a thing called cognitive load, where if you use your frontal lobe too much, you actually have diminishing returns on it throughout a day. And if you go into the natural world or just outside and you allow yourself to have your gaze soften, and you open up your ears in terms of a mind focus and just listen, just breathe, feel the breeze on your skin. And you kind of invite awe and reverence, kind of like, daydreaming might be a way of saying it. Just looking up at the trees, just allow yourself to focus on something that's caught your eye, something new from yesterday, small flower, the sound of a bird, whatever. A dewdrop on a leaf. So there'd be a
practice there of being very present in that moment, right? Exactly. Trying not to go into what do I have to do today or what
exactly.
happened yesterday.
It's just like gratitude in that there is a will involved in this. There's an intent to it, but it's like the way you would go get a massage or you go to exercise, and it's relaxing and it has all of these benefits to it. Then you come back inside, you're a whole new person in 20 minutes versus like burned out at the end of the day.
So gratitude. And then what'd you call that?
Sit spot.
Sit spot. Awesome.
Yeah.
How about a couple more of those of the 6?
So there's 3 that are awareness generating and then 3 that are meaning making oriented. So the 6 form a technology that inform each other. So gratitude and the sit spot, and the third one on the awareness side is sensory awareness. So I kind of bridged those 2 together, but it's really worth slowing down and saying, can I focus on my senses on purpose? Like there's a whole thing with people who we look at something, but we're not seeing it, or we hear something, but we're not listening. And until our attention is brought towards it, it pretty much doesn't exist. And I've done this with people, like birds will be singing in the background. We'll be having a whole conversation for half an hour. And I say, just like that bird's that's singing right now. Anyone hear the bird? They're like, yeah. I go, when did you start hearing that? And they're like,
right now.
Pretty much. I'm like, so does that mean your ears weren't working the other 30 minutes? And they're like, no, I was listening to you. I'm like, well, how come you didn't hear it? And it's a real conundrum because you think you can hear things because your ears work. But the weird thing is it's an awareness. And once the awareness kicks in, then you get to keep it. So I said, well, what's that like when you were with coworkers? What are you hearing and what are you not hearing? What are you seeing and not seeing? What does it take to be present and draw in the whole person there? Because you may be just relating to them like a thing versus something that's got dynamics to it.
Nice.
So that's how it relates to work. And then the flip side, there's 3 that are meaning making. And so the first one that I think people have the most familiarity with is journaling. So, journaling is routine that ties into the awareness practices of what have I noticed today? What are some of the things that are coming to my mind when I just pause and breathe for a minute that are attracting my attention? That check-in has a little bit of that to it, in a sense, where you're saying, what are you sitting on today? And maybe people haven't even thought about what they're sitting on, right? And in the journal, you're tracking yourself so you can go back at the end of the day and say, well, how did I do on that awareness that I brought up in the beginning of my day? Maybe my journal is, what's my intention today? What am I going to put my mind onto? And what am I going to, intend to get out of the day? And then reflect on it. What did I need that I didn't, assert, or what did I accomplish today that I want to acknowledge? Those are some reflections, right? What do I want to do tomorrow? And that's a very small thing that builds mindfulness into performance right away. The other 2 are more unfamiliar. One of them is like journaling, but it's a verbal version called Story of the Day. And Story of the Day comes out of a whole background, cultural anthropology with how native people that I've met have processed information on the land. So it's a human technology that we've lost touch with. I think that probably sounds really familiar, but imagine getting around the dinner table and everyone was off doing different things and you're checking in going, what happened today? Not just like any random thing, like what's important that happened today. because we need to get the intel to have a better day tomorrow or a different day or something. And you could do this at work over the course of maybe 5 days. So on Friday, you could have a story of the day, but really you're talking about the arc of the week. So that's a really positive collective learning environment called story of the day. The complement to that, which is the most tricky, is the asking of questions.
Is this the sixth one?
This is the sixth one. Okay. And this one is really designed around meaning making. The core of it is asking open-ended questions. There's a design I can share with you that goes through deepening levels of open-ended questions that moves people towards essentially cultivating wisdom from a raw event that was provoked but undiscerned. So it starts with, so what happened today? What happened on your way to work today? What happened during your work day? What happened with your kids? And highlight the things that stood out to you that maybe had an emotional kind of charge to it, or something that was different that you can't put your finger on, or happened several times and you're just starting to notice the pattern. Tell me more about that. Bring me into the story. And in that reobservation of it, you just relive the experience kind of in your mind's eye, and the listener is saying, oh yeah, I can see what you're saying. So what do you make that mean? Like, what's the connection there? What's the pattern that's happening? And they start to connect dots just because you asked the question. When you don't ask the question, the dots don't get connected a lot of time. And people are like, oh, I don't know, just move on. And then they relive it again another day. And then the third level question is, so stepping out of this unique situation, what's it telling you? What's it teaching you that is a transferable lesson? What's the big kind of takeaway here? And you might say something like, well, I'm just learning that what I put into it, I get out of it, right? You get this kind of one-liner that comes out of it. And that could be like a mantra for the week, or it could be like a pretty deep lesson, depending on how you got to that you get to keep. And now you're moving towards being an elder.
Nice.
And that's a community. That technology is a community function of how elders get created over time. So if we did that at work, this is an element of community that we'd be fostering, which is wisdom and elder development.
And mentorship and partnership. And yeah,
right.
It's awesome.
Yeah, this is like a core manager becomes leader, cultural leader type technology.
Right. Beautiful. I love that. Is there a place that our listeners could go check out those six?
Yeah, I'm setting up a special page just for podcasts like yours. So it's my website is aconnectedleader.com/podcast.
aconnectedleader.com/podcast.
Yeah.
You brought us pretty deep. I love it. I really do. Is there, if a manager was to say to you right now, hey, I've got a team, we feel a bit fragmented. Give me some practical steps. What can I do to help this team build community?
Well, here's a framework. It's called will, being, and function. So typically we focus on the function. What's something I could do? Okay, you could do this thing. You could do gratitude every day. What's the being state that informs gratitude? And we've talked about this, but it's misunderstood, because once I give you a technique, you could do it in a really dry, automatic way, and you're no longer actually grateful. You're performing a function. So you can't ignore this. And I'm sorry about that, but that takes a little time. But the being state is, an important thing to presence when you're doing a technique like gratitude. And then the third aspect is will, which actually precedes even the being state, which is, what's the driving why behind this whole thing? What is a kind of purpose? What is your will coming to the table for? Why do you want to help your team? Why do you even care? What's driving you around bringing this practice? And then presence that for yourself, if not for them. The being state will roll out of it, and then the technique will actually have a lot of lift. So I just wanted to offer that framework, and you could apply it to lots of things.
So I want to paraphrase a little bit, but also just see if I'm understanding. Let me start with the last thing you said. I'm really intrigued by. It starts with me, right? I mean, don't I, as a leader, have to be practicing and for example, the sit spot, the gratitude, and as I embody that kind of living and being and wholeness, right? That's going to be much more likely that I'm going to be able to bring that presence to my team, right? Would you recommend that we have discussion with our team about the will and the why, and then, being, and then the practice? Is this something that we as a group could spend some time over the next month or two?
I would for sure. I often think of myself as on the team when it comes to raising the energy of the workflow. Like, I just put myself in the circle, but I'm the leader of it. Right. So I'm doing two things at once. I'm like, hey, I really feel like things have been fragmented lately from my view. Some of you are noticing this. I'm hearing some of your feedback. So I'd like to begin a process this week. It's just going to be 5 days where we spend 30 minutes each morning regrouping around what's important. I know I need this. And so here's how the process is going to go. And what I really want to elevate here is, who do we have to be to rise to the occasion during this time, as opposed to collapse under confusion? And so I'll just start. So I'm a leader, but I need this kind of environment as well. And I feel like we need to refresh it regularly right now. So we want to give this a shot, and so I'm getting some buy-in, I'm participating with it. And then the doing this can shift a little bit. Maybe it's gratitude one day, maybe it's an open-ended question another day. Sometimes I'll be on a thing and I'll just have people put into the chat a reflective question. And it's cool because they just go straight into some deep aspect of who they are. And then I just allow people to read it. You're like, wow, instead of discussing that, what's it like to be on a team where we can just share stuff like that? And we just go, boom.
Great. That's really great. I love this. Hey, have you heard of the activity called the user's manual exercise?
No.
Adam Grant is a psychologist and author, and he created this. And we've modified it a little bit. But it's the idea that, when you get a new gadget, right, you always get a user's manual, right, that tells you how to use it. And what if we applied that to, how do you work with me? How do you best work with me? Like, what are some things about me that would be really great for you to know?
Yeah. So
we often will give our clients, before we gather for a work, for a consulting day or a workshop, we give them a whole bunch of questions ahead of time, and we say, you don't have to answer all these, but just pick and choose things like, what do I value, and what do people misunderstand about me, and what do I find hilarious, and what behaviors make me trust others? How would you know that you just really shouldn't ask me for anything now? Like, what would be the sign that kind of stay out of my way, or et cetera? And we've got a whole bunch of questions we give people to choose from. And then we say, look, pick and choose, and we even encourage people to journal for the couple of weeks beforehand and kind of think about this. And then during the day together, we'll just give everybody 5 minutes scattered throughout the day. Hey, it's user's manual time here. And, Joan, go ahead. It's cool. I've only done it once myself, but I know a couple of our other consultants have done it. I've got a couple of these planned for the summer, but I guess that's an example of giving people permission, right, to show up.
Yep. And it's structured. And if you could draw people's awareness to the change that just took place, that's also important. Because a lot of times, especially as a consultant, you can be a bit of a magician. You can come in with a really cool process and there's a state change going on in the room for people, but they don't exactly know how it happened. And one of my philosophies is around personal agency is really important. Sovereignty, and so if we externalize authority and externalize transformation, then we're kind of dependent on that process to get back into that state. So like I offered frameworks, I keep wanting to bring people back to how do they source that themselves? Nice. What are the methodologies, right? So let's say if you create that process for them, I might say, now everyone just take a moment and say, what are you experiencing now in the room? What are you present to now? What happened before when you first got here to where you are now? And then they might say what's changed for them, right? I often do this with sense meditation. I'll be like, how do you feel now? And they're like, oh my God, amazing. What would you do tomorrow to create this in a totally new way, but had the same effect?
Oh, just lovely.
Start to journal, right? All of a sudden the power's back in their seat, right? And they're integrating.
And I see that this is not something that they had to pay a consultant to come in and do.
Well, it's really helpful to have a disruptor. Right. Yeah. But we want to take that to the place where it comes back around to their seat.
It's sustainability. Yeah, that's exactly right. Hey, Mark, this is awesome. This is really, really good. And I hate to say this, but we are running out of time. I want to give you just a couple minutes to end our podcast with anything at all you would like our listeners to know about you, about where you come from, about your values, and specifically how they can get in contact with you.
Beautiful. Well, one thing I'm really excited about right now is I'm working at Google as a consultant, offering up a year-long process that I'm calling the Dojo. And it's an ongoing learning environment. And it's basically a technology of a lot of these things that we're talking about, meant to build in human development and learning as work gets done. So at the end of the day, you're more self-aware, you're growing around your edges, your teammates are actually inspired to support your self-understanding as opposed to outside authority. We're offering frameworks and processes, but it's more like a place where you rehearse and practice, a place of praxis, a community of praxis. And you bring your real world issues to the table about what you're working on at work, what your org is working on, what your company is working on in the changing markets. But at the end of the day, you actually bring that technology home with you to your parenting, to your community, to your relationship with your important relationships, because it's the same kind of consciousness that gets cultivated and developed in the dojo. So that's how I see this. Workplaces have an investment in developing community and leadership consciousness, because it doesn't end at 5:00. We can actually be, if you're a progressive executive or you say, yeah, I want to actually assist in making the world a better place. Well, we could do that by developing all of our employees as leaders who understand systems and the effect of their uniqueness and the rapport of their coworkers, bringing them out of burnout into healthy, thriving relationships. So that's a process I want to bring to organizations. And I want to see the workplace become a transformational instrument of social change, in that we can actually bring communities back into thriving, democratic stewards of the natural world, because we're bringing that technology to workplaces and we're opening up what it means to be a whole human there.
That's great. You've got a rich life. Are you going to go, dig out your own kayak this afternoon or what?
You know what I am doing? Every year I put on a feast for 12 people, and it's like an 18-course meal. And throughout the meal, I'm giving tiny little bite-sized portions like you would at a fancy restaurant. But each one is a story about my ancestral lineage, through my mother, through my father. One of those goes back to Ireland. And one of the foods that I learned about my ancestors during the famine in the 1800s, they ate seaweed for food and nutrition when they couldn't get their hands on any other kind of food. And one of them is called dulse. And so I went looking for it on the shores over there, and I realized we share the same ocean over here on the Atlantic, right? So my daughter and I are going to go to northern Maine along the coast, and we're going to harvest dulse like our ancestors did, dry it and preserve it and serve it at our ancestor feast this year.
That's awesome. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm in awe of who you are and what you do, Mark. This is awesome. How can people reach out to you?
Okay, so you can go to aconnectedleader.com/podcast. You can get those free 6 items that are super awesome for connecting for remote teams. You can even put /dojo if you want to check out my dojo offering that I've been doing outside of Google just for fun. You can send me an email if you want to figure out some consulting. Mark at aconnectedleader.com.
Awesome. Mark, thank you. This has been rich. I've got some new ideas, and I'm gonna process some of this. I'm gonna get into the 6. Oh, now again, what did you call the 6? The 6 what?
From isolation to connection.
From isolation to connection. Yeah, those are really, really good. Oh, I'm gonna steal, receive your gift. Thank you for that. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. We will be back in a couple of weeks with our next episode. Mark, you have a great day.
Thanks, Mike.